to Ellevate Louisiana Engage podcast. Ellevate Louisiana was founded earlier this year to empower women leaders throughout Louisiana by connecting and educating them on the challenges impacting our state with data-driven, nonpartisan solutions to make a better future for Louisiana. I am your host, Julie Stokes, and today we will be talking about the 2020 legislative session and the state budget with State Representative Zeringue. Representative Zeringue represents District 52, which is the home of Terrebonne area. He serves as chairman of House Appropriations, which is the committee where the state budget originates. He's also a member of the Joint Legislative Committee on the Capital Outlay, Budgetary Control Council, State Bond Commission, and also Joint Select Committee on Louisiana Economic Recovery. So we have a few minutes with a busy guy, so I really appreciate that. He came to the legislature in 2016 after having extensive experience, including being the executive director and the chairman of the Louisiana Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority. So he was also a big, massively on the scene coordinating with the BP oil spill, and has done a lot of work with the Terrebonne Levee Conservation District. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you.
Thanks. And I'm probably going to slip back and forth between being completely respectful and calling you Representative Zeringue, and every now and then a Z is going to pop out.
No, please call me Z. Please go with Z.
And his real name is actually Jerome, which is very hard to remember because I always called him Z, and everybody does. But thank you so much for joining us today. The legislature sure had a sharp about face when coronavirus came along. You know, we started thinking that we were going to have this state, the budget process with $1 billion or $500 million surplus, and now we're over $1 billion deficit. How is the mood up there in Baton Rouge right now? We've also got a lot of new people. So with all that being said, what's it like?
We do have a lot of new people, and with that, we have 45 new members in the House. There's over 15, close to half in the Senate. But we definitely do miss the expertise that you provided, your bright spirit, and just joy to be around. But we do miss you. And in terms of your expertise and experience in terms of fiscal matters, we definitely could use that right now in the session. But the mood right now is a lot better than what we originally thought, in so much as if you think back about 2.5 months ago, we thought we were going to have over $300 million in surplus that we were going to hopefully allocate to infrastructure or help higher education and healthcare. Pandemic hits, and then, and on top of that, to make matters worse, we also had the price of oil that dipped down. I mean, toilet paper was more expensive than a barrel of oil at one point. So it actually went negative. So we had the impact, as you know, from oil and gas, that how important it is to the economy, not as much as it used to be, but we were anticipating a $250 million hit to the budget just on the price of oil going down. But then on top of that, the pandemic. So as you indicated, we are addressing with this current fiscal year, $130 million deficit, and next fiscal year, fiscal year 21, over $918 million in deficit that we have to address.
Yeah.
But in referring to the mood, as unfortunate as the pandemic was, it did provide for funding, federal funding, that we are incorporating as best we can with the administration to address this budget deficit.
Yeah, and that's what I saw, that, when the governor pitched his plan to the House Appropriations Committee, it was kind of a relief that we could reach an agreement about using that money. In the past, legislature's gotten a little tied up on one-time money. And certainly this would be one-time money, but it's a one-time event. So we feel like by the fiscal year 2022, things will rebound, I'm imagining.
Right. And if you look at the revenue estimating forecast for this year, they're projecting 900, when I say this year, this fiscal year 21, they're projecting a $900 million deficit. But in 22, they're projecting $700 million increase. So if the economy does get back on track, and if businesses are able to hang on and we can get things going again, there may be a little bit of a deficit, but hopefully, obviously, it won't be as severe. But yes, in terms of one-time money, You obviously don't want to use it for recurring expenses, but the reality is either we use it or it just simply goes back to the feds and we have a $900 million hole to fill.
Right, exactly. Now, I thought part of the money that was received was for this year and part of it was for 2021. So part of it is for the fiscal year that ends 2020. How much was each?
Well, so what we're doing is, and credit to both the administration, also the agencies as well, and also our fiscal staff, and working to try to amend it to where some of it is kind of like fee swaps, to where we can take advantage of some of the money and use it this year and supplement state general fund that will be available for next year, so it's not as big of a hit. So
Yeah.
right now we're addressing the 130 million with some of the money that is obviously going to higher education and others, and then backfilling that, using CARE dollars for that, then backfilling it in the next year with state general fund. So it's kind of like a fee swap, which helps allocate that, but it's 130 deficit for this fiscal year and 900 million for next, for 21.
Well, and I was wondering how you were going to be able to use enough of it next year, so that makes sense. That's really good. So, I noticed that the governor's plan and the one that you guys adopted really kept TOPS intact, keeps higher ed intact also. Um, is there a rest of a hole that we're having to fill, or are we pretty much good for 2021? And what changes are being pitched out there that might create a problem?
Well, there's going to be some cuts. Obviously, we had to make some cuts, 200 million, because there was in the administrative budget prior to all this happening, about 95 million, 40 million was going to higher education. Remember, they were even talking about a teacher pay raise, an additional 40 million going to the MFP that would ultimately be used for the pay raise. So all that had been cut. And in addition, we had to reduce some of the agencies' funding and stat debt and also budget authority. But for the most part, it's a standstill budget that pretty much what they got last year, they're getting this year. So in some respects, that's a cut because of inflation and everything else, but at least it's not to the point where it's significant, much more than what they're at least getting for the most part, what they got last year.
Well, and I'll tell you what would have been the nightmare with a brand new legislature in so many respects. I was a little afraid going in with that $500 million surplus that we would then decide to give back parts of the penny or some other way really reduce income. And then if COVID would have happened the year after that, we'd have really been in a bad place. So I think that we probably got some mercy on the timing, because I think that could have been a real scenario problem that we could have had. So I'm wondering, like, on the House floor, were there any changes made on the House floor, or what's going on in Senate committee right now? How is that budget looking as far as big changes that are being made to it? And I guess first, actually, is it going to get passed by Monday, or are we definitely rolling that into the special session?
Well, I was just in committee, and again, I apologize for being late. Part of the reason for being late was because we were in the finance committee and passing the supplemental and revenue sharing. So those two will probably go through the process. But what's going to end up happening is HB 105, which is HB 1, because we didn't have the official forecast, so 1 is actually 105. Which, by the way, we will have an HB 1 because now that we have a forecast in the special. But to answer your question, judicial, HB 1, those will be, apart from the supplemental, will be in the special session. But we will probably get out the supplemental funding bill this year, this session.
That's good. So whatever happened, there were a couple of things I was following through, and I thought, wow, that could make the deficit bigger. Just kind of wondering and wanted to follow up on some of those. And look, I know what it's like to be a legislator when all the stuff's moving through session. So if I ask you where something stands and you're like, I really don't know, that's okay. Everybody out there listening should know that when you're dealing in session and things get over to the Senate, and sometimes it's hard to keep track of where everything is. But I know that one of the representatives had a bill that would have allowed the state only to spend 95% of, or 98%
And 98%.
of what the REC had recognized. And I thought to myself, it's probably not the best year for that. Good idea, maybe not right now. Whatever happened there?
Yeah, and it's essentially from a budgeting perspective, it is a good idea, but you're right,
Yeah.
because of the obvious issues we're having with the fiscal crisis we're having right now, experiencing. But that actually made it through the House. It was in committee, and in the Finance Committee, they didn't necessarily defer the bill. They kind of put it on, you know how they put it on the pile or put it on the side? So
The
it's
pile.
on, yes, it's on the pile, and it's pretty much for the most part dead for this session.
Gotcha. That's what I kind of figured that the pile. I remember the pile well.
Yeah,
That was not a place you wanted to be.
no.
There were also a few big tax, well, we call it tax spending. And I think that came to be that way probably 4 to 6 years ago when we had to cut spending, but when we either had to cut spending or raise taxes, and we couldn't raise taxes. So we found ways to cut tax spending. So I noticed that there were a few big kind of tax spending proposals. They had a suspension of severance tax. Is that going to happen, or where's that?
That the suspension of severance tax is working its way through the process. Whether or not it ultimately makes it through, again, we are adjourning Monday. So if it, I think after tomorrow, it's going to require a 2/3 vote. So it may or may not make it. There were some business tax incentive bills, reducing those, and a few of those, like for the all industry and others, didn't
Yeah.
quite make it. But I think the severance tax one is still viable and working its way through the process. Now, whether or not it makes it, I'm not sure. It's made it through the House.
There was also a push similar with franchise tax to suspend franchise tax. That I know that it looks small on a net basis, but when you look at it on a gross basis before all the credits and everything get applied to it, it's a lot of money. What happened with that?
I That's one of those with everything going on. I'd rather not miss, but I think it's for the
Yeah.
most part like the other one, just working its way through the process. But it may not make it through.
Yeah, I know, because I mean, at some point you get worried. You don't want to turn $1 billion deficit into a $2 billion deficit, even though I think they're all good ideas and we wish we could do it. Sometimes it gets tough. Um, so I know that there's a couple of, well, first of all, actually HB2. HB2 looks like it's kind of on the shelf until the special session.
Yes.
Okay. And I'll tell you, HB2 is capital outlay. So it's capital outlay for various things around the state spending, and also some spending that's for the local governments. And so it's basically capital outlay all around the state. So it makes sense that that would be probably deferred if the big HB1 bill, or the HB 105 as you would have it, is deferred.
Yeah. But one interesting thing to HB2, which you would appreciate. So to address the budget deficit, obviously we're going to utilize as much of the federal dollars as we can, but it's not going to be enough. So we're looking at rainy day, probably about 90 million rainy day fund, of which there was about 135 million available. So we're not exhausting what we could use, which still frees up about 40 that if there is after next fiscal year a problem, or if we have to come back in a special to address some of those things, we still have that flexibility. But one of the things we were trying to do, I know Patrick and I and Clay, and you would appreciate this, on debt defeasance, in terms of, well, we have this surplus that potentially we can either go build projects or use it for debt defeasance, which then frees it. You pay off your mortgage a little bit ahead of time, but then frees up state general fund potentially for the next year that could be used. I think there's an interest of saying, well, if it's available, let's put it into projects and not use it for, debt defeasance. So that was an
Yeah.
issue, and it still may be considered in the special, but we were actually looking at the possibility of doing that.
Yeah, that will be interesting to see how that shapes up. And capital outlay makes me think about one of the things that I had a little hope for, that we'd be able to do some infrastructure funding to get some road projects going, because we have an infrastructure problem. And of course, this pandemic, I mean, oil crisis, who could have imagined that many things would go wrong that
Yeah.
fast? I'm sure it had to be hard for you guys, but I guess all of that's on the back burner too, huh?
Yeah, and that's what I think some of what they're trying to do, instead of debt defeasance, in lieu of that, through the capital outlay, use it. There's the thought that we need to take that money, put it into projects to kickstart the economy, get it into roads and bridges to get people employed and get the economy back going again. So there's also
Right.
there's the potential to use what's available to be able to do some of that.
Yeah, yeah, because it's so important. We're at a
Yeah.
crossroads right now. The other thing I know that is probably going to be one of the victims of this whole situation. I've got my dog barking in the background. If y'all can hear that, gotta love that. We'll have to talk to the kids about getting the dog out of the house. But that is early childhood education. I think a lot of us really hoped that something would happen there, but I guess that's just kind of on the back burner for
It,
now.
it, it is, but hopefully we can put it back in. And believe me, my wife's early childhood, she taught non-categorical preschool for 30 years. So that,
Mm,
early childhood education and that aspect of it is so important for our future and for
that's
our
great.
kids. And I know we'd love to be able to do some things. And there's still a high interest within the body to do something. And I think if we can, we'd like to do some more.
Yeah, that's great. I'm glad to hear that. So, two more little things that have been on my mind, and just wondering about, since have such a strong background in the coastal arena. I saw where I was at the legislature yesterday. I had a cancer advocacy bill that I was helping with, and I saw that the bill that would stop the parishes from being able to sue the lawsuits was up in House and Governmental Committee.
Hmm.
And so I guess, does it look like that bill goes all the way through the system, I would think, or what do we
Well,
think is going to happen there?
Well, there were two. Actually, there were several. There was one that was in natural resources that started from Bob Henskins, the chairman of natural resources in the Senate. That one is pretty much dead for this session. There's two that currently are ongoing. Senator Hewitt has an SCR that would essentially eliminate or stop the lawsuits, and Senator Fazy had a bill that basically would have stopped it too. Fazy's bill was recommitted to appropriations to our committee with a fiscal note, but because of the fact that by the time the fiscal note and the time of session, that one's pretty much done. So right now, the one that is still alive and viable is Senator Hewitt's SCR, which essentially says that the parish is encouraging. I don't know if it either requests that the parishes halt the lawsuits or prevents or eliminates them. I haven't read the whole thing yet, but I know it's specific to, it got through House and Governmental Affairs, and I think it's still working through its way through the process.
Yeah, that's just such a hotly debated issue, and it's
Yes.
really easy to see both sides of it. And I hope that I hope that we can make the good decisions that are right. How do you see? I saw an article that came through not long ago, um, the newspaper somewhere, and it's the headline was "We're screwed." Did you
Oh,
see
yeah.
that one? And
And,
I,
and, yeah. And it's unfortunate because there is no doubt the issue of coastal land loss is a problem that we are going to be faced with forever, simply because we live in a delta. It's the Mississippi River that built this deltaic process. And we've completely changed it and modified it, both with the levees. There's no doubt oil and gas had an impact, but primarily altering the hydrology that built the system with the levee has such a significant impact. So we're working on trying to do diversions and marsh creation, in addition to the flood protection that's so important to the people down here. And I think it misrepresented what the state's working on with the coastal master plan, and they've accounted for some of the concerns, sea level rise, subsidence, and we know that's a problem, and that is factored into the plan. So yeah, that from his perspective, we may be screwed, but the reality is I think we're planning to address as best we can. We'll never get back what we had, but I think we can continue to have a viable, thriving ecosystem in coastal communities as we learn to build stronger and smarter. We're going to have to face land loss and high water and hurricanes, as we've always had for decades, but at least we're learning in terms of where our priorities and how we can build stronger and smarter to address the unfortunate reality of how we're going to live with coastal land loss and the issues of sea level rise from here on out.
yeah, because I'm really not excited about living on the island of the New Orleans
Oh,
area.
geez. Yeah.
I know it's that's kind of scary. Well, along that line, and just one more little thing, it said that our coastal master plan accounted for 3 to 5 inches or 3 to 5 millimeters. I don't know of sea rise, but that it
Uh-huh.
was actually going to be 9. Is that something you've heard before, or?
Yes, right. And there's different scenarios, if you look at the parameters and the factors that are utilized to assess and determine what the ultimate impacts will be, there's different scenarios. There's the moderate, and then there's the worst case scenario. And obviously, they taken and even expanded past that. But the plan that the state is putting together is looking at the potential for the worst case scenario and factoring into it as best we can. So when we look at elevation heights, look at building projects, and looking where the priorities need to be, we're factoring that as best we can. But ultimately, we could spend $200 billion and not resolve the issue of coastal land loss and fix this problem. It's going to be a recurring issue, but we want to make sure that the limited dollars we do have, we're maximizing it and putting them into those priorities to have the biggest effect. And I think we'll continue to do that.
Yeah. Well, that's good because, like I said, we don't want the island of New Orleans, Jefferson. I guess just the East Bank. I'm not sure how that would work, but I don't want it.
Yeah, but before
That's
it
all
gets
I
to
know.
that, believe me, we would be underwater because I'm even closer to the coast than y'all are.
True.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, sorry. Yeah, you have it worse. I agree. Well, I just appreciate you being here so much. We're about out of time, but thank you, Representative Chairman Zeringue, for being here and sharing a little bit of what I know was an intensely crazy day over there. And I saw you presenting bills on the House floor and bills in committee. So we really appreciate you spending the time to help get us up to speed. And thank you to those of you out here watching this Ellevate Louisiana Engage podcast. We really appreciate you being here as we elevate women and elevate Louisiana. Thank you so much.